Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at 10 o'clock in the morning. I hope you've all had a good start to the day. Welcome to BookTastic. We are so delighted to welcome so many of you with us to our first ever schools programme. We've been doing BookTastic for 8 years, but this is the first time we've had schools involved. It's a shame we're not welcoming you in person, but we're already working really hard on our 2022 programme. Fingers crossed, we're going to be able to see you and we're going to be able to be together and celebrate books in person next year. And one of the wonderful opportunities that sprung up from this is that we're able to welcome schools from all across the UK and not just Bedford, which is something that we're planning to continue next year. So when we can all be together again in 2022, there's going to be a hybrid festival. So Bedford schools can come along and join us physically, and we're going to be live streaming it simultaneously so that you can all continue to enjoy our events from across the UK. Now, we could not be kicking the whole festival off with a more exciting event. Some of you may know this author from her best-selling Beetle Boy series. Some of you will have devoured the incredible Adventures on Trains books. But today, MG Leonard is going to introduce you to her latest incredible book, Twitch. And I can tell you, you are in for a treat. Me and my son devoured this book. It's been described as a winged masterpiece. It's a thrilling, fast-paced adventure. It's full of excitement and wonder, and somebody even described it as like a collaboration between Roald Dahl and Sir David Attenborough. Now, this is your chance to ask Maya anything you like about her books or her writing process. If you look to the bottom of your screen, you should see a button that says Live Chat. If you type your questions in there, we'll be able to see them pop up, and at the end, I'm going to ask Maya all the things that you want to find out. But I'm not going to keep you any longer because you don't want to listen to me. You want to listen to this wonderful author that's joining me on the screen here. This is MG Leonard.
Hi.
How are you today?
I'm very well. I'm very well. I'm very excited to be here.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm going to get away from the screen. I'm going to take me away and leave everybody with you. So off you pop. Thanks, Maya.
Okay, bye, Rachel. See you in a bit for questions at the end. So hello, everybody. I am MG Leonard. I have got a little slideshow that I'm going to show you whilst I talk, and hopefully you'll still be able to see me as well in the corner, because pictures will be much more interesting than just looking at my face the whole time. So here we go. Here is the slideshow, and there's me up in the corner. I will pop back at the end, and if you have questions, your teachers can put them into the chat room and Rachel will ask me them at the end. So I'm going to leave as much time as possible for questions. So without further ado, let me begin. I'm just going to get my little slideshow up. So my name is MG Leonard and I write a lot of books, and here are some of the books of mine that you may have read. I co-write a series called Adventures on Trains with a lovely chap called Sam Sedgman. And those adventures, obviously, are all about trains. They're about a boy who's a detective who's awesome at drawing, and he goes on amazing adventure journeys with his uncle on trains all over the world. And there are 4 of those trains books currently that you can read. But the thing that I'm most famous for, the book that came out back in 2016 and started my career, are the Beetle Boy books. And I'm pretty well known as the Beetle Lady. That's what people call me, because my passion and love for beetles and insects is pretty immense. So much so that you can see from this slide that I've actually written 5 whole books about them. 3 storybooks, the Beetle Boy books are a trilogy, 1 fact book, a non-fiction book called The Beetle Collector's Handbook, and a picture book for younger readers. I'm also the vice president of a very important charity called Bug Life with Steve Backshall, and we campaign to preserve the habitat of insects because insects are very important. And in fact, I've got a little slide here, which I call my slide of inspiration, which just shows you in one glance how utterly impressive and amazing beetles are. But it was beetles that led me to write a book about birds. And I will tell you a little bit more about how the idea came about in a moment. But I will just give you a quick guided tour of what you can see on your screens right now. In the right-hand slide, there's a beetle that looks like it's doing a massive wee, but it isn't. It is not doing a wee at all. In fact, what it is doing is spraying a toxic, boiling hot acid out of its abdomen at an approaching predator. Now, that predator is most likely to be a bird. This beetle is called the bombardier beetle, and it's called a bombardier beetle because what's happening here, where this acid is flying out of its abdomen, is a chemical explosion that takes place in the beetle's body that fires this acid out at a predator. And I think the bombardier beetle is possibly one of the coolest beetles on the planet, mostly because this incredible defense mechanism inspired the invention of something that has saved thousands of human lives, and that is the fire extinguisher. Because inside a fire extinguisher, similar to the inside of a beetle's body, there's a chamber and two different compounds meet in that chamber that creates an explosion, and the foam flies out of the fire extinguisher at the fire. Over here on the left-hand side, you can see a beetle taking off in flight. This is called the Darwin beetle, and it's named after Charles Darwin because he discovered it in the Galapagos Islands when he was on HMS Beagle. And as you can see, this beetle flies up like a rocket, but it's a perfect example of what a beetle is. It's got these hard elytra outer wings, and underneath we've got soft membranous wings. And then in the bottom left-hand slide, we've got the very common ladybird, which is an astonishing beetle when you actually find out that they're vicious cannibals that will eat their own children if they're hungry and there isn't any food. And they also squeeze a bitter tasting vile yellow blood out of the joints of their legs if they feel threatened. So if you've ever had a ladybird land on your hand and you think it's done a wee on you, that is not wee, my friend. That is ladybird blood. And it's there so that a predator won't gobble it up. And down there in the right-hand corner are two battling rhinoceros beetles. And it's a rhinoceros beetle that is the hero of the Beetle Boy series. And I discovered when I was researching that series that in Japan and China, children will have beetles as pets, just like we will have hamsters or guinea pigs. And they battle them after school. They go around each other's houses and they set them up on a log and they set the beetles battling. And it was a bunch of children who loved battling their beetles, who grew up and went to university. And some of them became computer software engineers, and some of them became entomologists, which is the other word for insect scientists. And they all missed battling beetles with each other. And so they got their heads together and they decided to build an online game where they could battle their beetles in virtual form. And then they thought, well, let's not make them beetles, let's make them lots of different types of creatures, but let's give them a metamorphosis like an insect has. And so they created a very famous video game. Some of you will already have guessed what that video game is. It's Pokemon. All of the monsters in Pokemon are actually based on different insects, and then with a lot of imagination. So this is my slide of inspiration, because all of these beetles challenge your expectations of what you think you might expect from the undergrowth, and of course have created wonderful inventions and creations from their existence. And they have all inspired me to write books about beetles. But I'm not here to talk about beetles, even though I am the beetle lady. I'm actually here to talk about my newest book, and I'm very excited about it. It's called Twitch, and it's about a bird watcher. Now, I often get asked this question, which is, how do I have the ideas for a story? And I'm going to tell you exactly how this idea came about, because it was whilst I was doing my Beetle Boy events and going up and down the country and meeting lots of boys and girls who love insects that I realised many of the children who love nature and like being out of doors, who loved insects and enjoyed reading Beetle Boy, also liked watching birds. Many of them were proper, experienced and knowledgeable bird spotters. And quite a few of them asked me if maybe, perhaps one day, I could write a book about a bird watcher. And I didn't think that I could do this because I wasn't a bird watcher. I didn't know anything about birds. I was the beetle lady. I knew lots about bugs. But I noticed a few things about the children that were coming to my events. The ones that liked to be outdoors and loved nature, they often wore camouflage clothes and they carried binoculars or cameras. They always had notebooks and pencils. They had field guides so they could look up to see what kind of a bird or creature they were discovering. They were quite adventurous, but if they were bird watchers, they were very good at sitting still for long periods of time, being stealthy and patient, because otherwise you frighten birds away. They were excellent at camouflage. And I got thinking, hang on a minute, these are all the same traits as a detective. A bird watcher would make a fantastic detective. And the moment I had that thought, it was like a seed was planted in my brain and it started to grow into an amazing story. So let me introduce you to Twitch, because once I started looking at bird watchers, I knew, of course, that my bird watcher was going to be a young person that likes watching birds. And I discovered this boy called Indy Green. I saw him on the BBC website, and he could walk through a woods and identify which birds were around him just by hearing their song. And there's a video of him on the BBC website just walking around going, oh, blue tit, blackbird. And it felt to me like some kind of a superhero power. I certainly couldn't tell you what bird was around me by just hearing lots of different bird song, and I can't distinguish one bird from another. But Indy had learned all of the bird calls, and suddenly I realized that I was going to base my character of Twitch on him. He was very passionate about birds when he spoke about them, and that gave me the idea to make Twitch into a boy and base it on this particular real person who I've never met, I must say. So only the fact that he's a bird watcher really is inspired by Indy. All of Twitch's character traits I've invented. However, I myself didn't know much about bird watching, and even though I had the idea to have a boy who was a bird watcher and a detective, I didn't really know where to set my story or what was going to be in it or what might happen. So I looked online for exciting outdoor nature reserves that I thought might be a great place for a story. And I found this amazing place. It was in the Calder Valley in Yorkshire, and it's called Cromwell Bottom. So I thought, right, this isn't a book yet. It's just the idea for a book. To turn it into a book, I'm going to need lots more ingredients to put into my story. So in 2019, I got my family together and we all went on holiday, a research holiday, an adventure to Cromwell Bottom. We hired a canal boat because I realized that there was a canal alongside the nature reserve. So this is my family. They're my two boys and my husband. And we hired this boat called the Suffolk, and we sailed it along the canal to Cromwell Bottom. And I told everyone, this is a research trip and it's like a game. Every single bird that you spot and you identify correctly using the field guide, I'm going to put into my book, Twitch. And so we all spent the entire holiday looking and hunting for birds. And every single bird that we saw on that trip is in the pages of this book. There are over 30 different types of bird in this book. So we had a great time exploring and finding birds. But one of the things that really inspired me most was the nature reserve itself. So what you can see on this slide in front of you, on the left is the actual map that you can download online of Cromwell Bottom. This is the map that we used when we were walking around the nature reserve. And on the right, what you can see is Aves Wood. This is the map that's at the beginning of Twitch in the front pages of the book. And if you compare the two, you will see that I have borrowed heavily from real life. I didn't call the nature reserve in my book Cromwell Bottom because every time you say the word bottom when you're reading, everybody giggles, and I definitely didn't want people to laugh at the exciting bits in the book. But I also wanted this nature reserve not to be anywhere specific, because everybody's got a nature reserve near to them somewhere. And so I wanted Aveswood to be like any nature reserve, not a particular one. But if you look at the map at the beginning of Twitch, you can see that the river is the same shape, that I've got the canal in there with the lock gates. I've even got the same bridges, although I've named them different things. And I've got the railway track as well that goes along the other side of the river. So you see, I'm heavily inspired by the real life setting that I discovered in Cromwell Bottom. And what I did is, as we were going around the nature reserve, I took lots of photographs of interesting things that I saw, and I wrote everything down into notebooks. I managed to fill 3 A5 notebooks as I was there with every single interesting thing that I found. Sometimes I would write down the plants that I could see. Sometimes I would write down the weather. Sometimes I'd write down what the soil smelt like. I would write down what things felt like, what texture tree bark might have. I wrote down every single thing that I thought of that might help me bring the setting alive. But I also looked out for anything that might suggest plot points. So in the top left-hand corner here, you can see me and my boys walking around Cromwell Bottom. In the top right-hand corner, you can see that when we were exploring the nature reserve, we discovered a campfire that was beside the river. Now, this campfire was mostly gone out, but it was still smouldering on the inside. It was still warm. And I thought, that's interesting. We went into the nature reserve quite early, about 8 o'clock in the morning, but somebody had made a fire much earlier. And that made me think, who would make a fire by a river at like 6 o'clock in the morning? I can't imagine who might do that. And that was a question that I wrote down in my notebook. And I took a picture of the fire and I thought, I think I might include a mysterious campfire in my story. Then I saw in the bottom left-hand corner, this rusty old shopping trolley up a tree. Now, this trolley was so rusty and so old, it had obviously been there for years, but it was also much smaller than the shopping trolleys we have today. And it made me think, wow, I think it's probably been up there for maybe 50 years. It's a very old shopping trolley. And it was so old that the branches of the tree had kind of grown through it. I took a photo, I noted it down in my notebook. And indeed, if you look on the map at the beginning of Twitch, you will see that there is a shopping trolley tree and it features in the story. And there on the bottom right-hand corner is the Kissing Gate, which is the entrance into Cromwell Bottom Nature Reserve. And I've kept that and the no cycling sign and used that as part of my story as well. So you see, when you research for a story, just having an idea isn't enough. Sometimes you have to go to a place and try and gather as many facts or anything that sparks ideas as possible. And that is what I managed to get from Cromwell Bottom. But of course, the most important thing for me was the bird watching element, was trying to see as many birds as possible, because I always knew that this book was going to be about a bird watcher and about the wonder of birds, because birds are awesome. So I want to introduce you to the birds in the book. Most people assume that if you're going to write a book about birds, the birds that you're going to celebrate most of all are the rarest and most interesting ones. But not so with this book. The heroes in this story are actually pigeons. Here are the 4 pigeons you will meet if you read Twitch. You meet Scabby in chapter 1. Twitch and Scabby become fast friends after a very dramatic incident in chapter 1. And Scabby comes home with Twitch and lives with Twitch. There he meets Maud, his wife, and they have a clutch of eggs. 2 chicks hatch out of those eggs, and those chicks are Squeaker and Frazzle. And Twitch has plans to train Squeaker and Frazzle to be homing pigeons. That is what he wants to do with his summer holidays, train them to fly home from wherever he releases them, and perhaps, if they're good enough, attach messages to their ankles, because pigeons were used as homing pigeons in both world wars to send spy messages. So he's got high plans for his summer. Now, a lot of people don't like pigeons. They say that they are dirty or they're disgusting or they're flying rats. And I would like to make the case very strongly for pigeons being one of the most awesome birds in the world. Now, you may not believe me, so I'm going to dazzle you with some amazing facts about pigeons. Believe it or not, pigeons are intelligent. They are one of a small number of animals that can pass what is called the mirror test. Now, this means that the creature looks in the mirror and recognizes what it's seeing is a reflection of itself. If you take my very stupid cat and you put him in front of the mirror, his tail goes bushy, he goes up onto his paws and he hisses because he thinks there's another cat in our house. Not a very clever animal. However, a pigeon, if he looks in the mirror, will recognize that he can see himself. And the scientists have tested this by putting a dirty ash mark on the pigeon, and the pigeon will see themselves in the mirror and think, oh, I've got a dirty wing, and they immediately start trying to clean the ash off. So you see, they are very clever. But it's not just that they can recognize themselves in a mirror. Oh no. It has been proven that pigeons can recognize different human faces. And not only can they differentiate between humans, they can pick out a human face in a photograph, in a two-dimensional representation. They can recognize you and pick you out of a parade in a photograph, which is amazing. And they can even recognize and differentiate between the different letters of the human alphabet. See? Very clever. But not only do they have the smarts, they have extraordinary navigational skills. They have this internal compass, which means they always know which way north is, and they navigate using the stars and the planets and the sun, but they also use human landmarks. It has been noticed that some pigeons will use motorways. They'll literally fly up the motorway and come off at a junction exit because they know it's a direct route to where they want to go. And you and I, we're only allowed to travel on the motorway at a maximum speed of 70 miles an hour. But the average flying speed of a pigeon is 78 miles an hour, and the highest recorded speed is 93. So that means if I set off for Yorkshire from Brighton, which is where I live, a pigeon would definitely get there before I would, even if I drove at the full extent of the speed limit all the way. A pigeon would have a much more direct route and a much faster speed of travel, which I think is awesome. Pigeons are friendly birds. They're sociable. They can be seen in flocks of 20 to 30. And my favourite thing about pigeons is that they mate for life. When they fall in love, it's forever. And both the female and the male pigeons share the responsibility equally for raising their young. Both the male and the female bird will take turns to sit on the eggs to keep them warm. And once they're hatched, both mummy and daddy make this weird kind of pigeon milk inside their necks, and they both feed their chicks. So you see, they share all things equally, and I'm a big fan of boys and girls sharing things equally. So they are awesome. But that's not it. That's just not the end of it, because I would just like to take this moment to dispel all of the urban myths about them being dirty birds. They actually aren't. There is no scientific evidence that they spread disease or that they're dirty. It's just that you often see them in cities and they reflect their environment. If you see a pigeon with one leg dragging a chip along the high street, you might think it's a dirty bird, but actually it's probably got injured because the city has got lots of risks to birds, and it's found the closest food source, which may be a chip from the bin, but it does not mean the bird is actually disease-ridden or dirty. So, as you can see, I'm a big fan of pigeons, and they are the stars of this book. They aren't the only birds in this book. There are lots of other birds in this book. You will find crows and sparrows and swifts and starlings and swallows and herons and blue tits and robins and oyster catchers and falcons and geese and kingfishers and owls, even woodpeckers. There are so many birds in this book, and I've had the pleasure of seeing all of them, which is super wonderful. Now, what I would like to do is read you an extract from Twitch, and I'm going to shut off the PowerPoint now and ask the wonderful Hannah to make me full screen if that's possible. Thank you, Hannah. Great. It's much better if you can see me when I am reading. So I thought I would read an extract from chapter 4. What I'm about to read you, we're in Aves Wood, we're in the nature reserve. Twitch has gone there. It's the summer holidays. It's literally the first day. School's just broken up. He's gone straight to the nature reserve, which is where he wants to be for the whole summer. His plan is that he's going to spend the entire summer training his pigeons, and he's built this hide in the nature reserve, and he wants to spend the summer looking at the birds in the pond and see all the chicks hatching and fledging and the birds nesting, and keep his nature diary and record everything that he sees there. So he's got a pretty chill summer sorted out. Unfortunately, the day before the school holidays, a robber, a bank robber and a convicted murderer escapes from a local prison. And he's followed to Aves Wood. Rumours go around that the missing loot that the bank robber has stolen, £5 million, has got to be hidden somewhere, and people think that the robber has escaped to try and find the money. So Twitch, not knowing any of this, has gone to the nature reserve. It's the first day of the holidays. He wants to see some birds, and he's found the place swarming with police and sniffer dogs, and he doesn't understand why. He's in his hide, which is camouflaged, and he's watching everything that's going on around him, very excited and perplexed. Amongst all of this police action, he suddenly, through his binoculars, spies 2 girls behaving mysteriously. And so he sets out to find out what they're up to. Chapter 4. A Silver Kingfisher. By the time Twitch reached the end of the rabbit track, the girls had gone. He felt deflated. Now he'd never know why they were hiding or looking scared. He didn't think they were local. He'd never seen them before, and Bridvale was a small town. Most likely, they were summer tourists. Going over to the fallen tree trunk, Twitch crouched in the same spot that the girls had and peered over the top. He had a clear view of the main footpath. At the distant crossroads stood a squadron of police officers with stern faces. Whatever was happening in Aves Wood, Twitch realised with a thrill that he shouldn't be here. He crawled backwards, and his eye glimpsed the shimmer of a violet ground beetle scurrying under leaf mulch, hunting for slugs to eat. It scuttled over a string of blue and green beads, half hidden in the leaves. He picked it up between thumb and forefinger. It was a bracelet with a tiny silver bird dangling from it. A kingfisher. It felt like a sign. He slipped it into his pocket. If he saw the girls again, he'd use the bracelet as an excuse to talk to them and find out why they'd been spying on the police. Thinking it best not to look suspicious, Twitch marched upright and noisily through the trees to the main footpath. And sure enough, before he got there, an officer had called out to him. "You, young man, come here." "Yes, sir," Twitch obeyed. "What's going on, officer?" he asked. "Why are there so many police here?" "We're combing the woods," the officer replied. "Are you on your own?" Twitch nodded. "Bird watching?" He pointed at the binoculars around Twitch's neck and smiled. Twitch nodded again. "Seen anyone around here that you don't know?" Twitch thought of the 2 girls, but was already shaking his head. The girls had looked scared of the police, and he didn't want to get them into any trouble. "Okay, well, I need you to exit that way and go straight home." He pointed in the opposite direction to the way that Twitch needed to go. "We're clearing the reserve." "Yes, officer." Twitch turned, then paused. "Is it a bad crime? I mean, no one's been murdered, have they?" "Have they?" Nothing like that, the officer reassured him. Yesterday, a dangerous prisoner escaped from Dovelock Prison. They've been spotted in the area, and we've reason to believe they are coming here. Why? To collect something, the officer said with meaning. And that's where I'm going to leave it. If you want to find out what happens to the bank robber, the missing millions of pounds, all those amazing birds, Twitch and his friends, you're going to have to read the story. Now, I hope we've got some time for some questions. How are we doing? Is Rachel there?
We have indeed. Hannah, can you bring me in? Fantastic. That's okay. There we go. Hello. That was amazing. Thank you so much. And we have so many questions. They've just been flying in. So I'm going to get through as many of them as I can. Now, I think you did answer this partly, but if there's anything else you want to add to this, Livingston School have asked, where do you get your ideas?
Well, I do listen to children because the Beetle Boy ideas really came from the fact that my son was scared of insects when he was tiny, and I knew that he had learnt to be scared from me because I used to be terrified of insects. And I thought, well, maybe if there was a really good book about insects, about how awesome they were, but wasn't like an educational book, was a really fun adventure, and I'd read that when I was a kid, maybe I wouldn't be scared of them. Maybe I'd be curious and knowledgeable. And so I kind of wrote that book because I wanted my son not to be scared of insects, and now he isn't, and now obviously neither am I. And that's what I wanted to create from that book, was a book that would inspire children to love insects. And it was by listening to children who loved the insects saying that they wanted something about birds that made me question, oh, can I do this? Maybe I can. And it was my son's love of trains that made me write the Adventures on Trains series. That's how I came up with the ideas. So most of my ideas come from listening to children and the kinds of stories that they want to read.
Perfect. What's your favourite book that you've ever read? That's another question from Livingston School.
So when I was young, I had two favourite books, and I definitely couldn't choose between them. The first one was The Twits by Roald Dahl. I absolutely loved that book. When I was little, my parents got divorced, but before they got divorced, there was quite a few years where they were really mean to one another. And when I read The Twits, I thought it was hilarious that this man and this wife were living together and they couldn't leave each other, but they hated each other so much that they tortured each other by putting worms in their spaghetti and telling Mrs. Twit that she'd got the dreaded shrinks and that she was shrinking away to nothing. And it was like a very kind of like caricature example of what I was actually seeing in my own home. But like adults are very weird when they're mean to each other. And so I found it very funny, and it gave me permission to kind of laugh at what was happening in my life. And I've read it so many times, and I always laugh. It's a brilliant book, and I love the grotesqueness of the characters. I kind of enjoyed their disgustingness. And in fact, the Twits inspired Humphrey and Pickering, who are the two disgusting characters in the Beetle Boy series that have to live with each other, even though they hate each other. So The Twits was a very seminal influence in my life. And the other book that really had a big impact on my brain and my whole life was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which was about a girl called Mary Lennox, who was quite objectionable and not very likable, coming to a house, a posh house, in England from India because her parents had died, and discovering a secret garden that was all overgrown. And even though she didn't know anything about nature or anything about gardening or anything about bringing it back to life again, she met a wonderful boy called Dickon who taught her how to look after plants and how to talk to birds and foxes and understand nature. And through the course of the book, through developing a relationship with nature and gardening and animals, she became a much nicer human being. And there's another boy called Colin who was poorly, and he healed. And the book really kind of registered in my brain as the fact that anyone can learn to have a relationship with the natural world. And once you've got one, you'll become a much nicer, happier, healthier person. And that's something that I believe in very much now. And it's one of the driving influences for every book that I write. So those two books.
Fantastic. I love this question from Offord Primary School. Do you reference any of your other books in Twitch? We noticed the Beetle reference when you were reading.
So there's always little crossover things. I try and put a beetle in every story that I write, because one of the things that does bug me, excuse the pun, when I read other books is that quite often people are so intent on describing the adventure that they forget that everyone at all times is surrounded by insects. Like literally right now, there are insects all around me and not just my pets. You know, there are insects in the floorboards. There are insects everywhere, but they very rarely get described. So there should always be a beetle in the story, at least one. You know, they're the most popular creature on the entire planet. So yeah, I do have crossover motifs, but I don't tend to have characters or anything that's a direct lift.
So, okay, there are quite a few questions from all schools that I'm going to try and amalgamate into one, which is along the lines of, why did you become an author? Did you want to be an author when you were young? And if you weren't an author, what would you be?
So this is a great question for everybody who's at school right now watching. I was really bad at school. I was not naughty. I just wasn't very good at writing. And if I was doing the SATs now, I would definitely fail the English writing tests, because in my day, we didn't have SATs. We just got a school report. And when I left school at the end of year 6 for my creative writing, I got a D minus, which is basically as close to a fail as you can get, because A is good, A is excellent, B is good, C is average, and D is poor, and E is a fail. And I got D minus for my writing because I couldn't spell. I still find it very difficult to spell words because I think of them phonetically, and my brain works so fast, I tend to write down the phonetic spelling, which can change. And I didn't understand grammar at all. Apostrophes and commas, I got very confused by them. I got confused by a lot of things. So I had very messy handwriting. And I was tested for things like dyslexia and dyspraxia, and I don't have any of those things. I was just really bad at writing. And so I never dreamed, not in my wildest dreams, I never dreamed of being an author. I read all the time. I loved reading, and I listened to this oral storytelling thing called Storyteller on tapes, cassettes when I was little. So I liked audiobooks. And so I loved stories, but I never thought I could write. And I never dreamed that I would be a writer. So the fact that I have become one is kind of weird. And I became one because I loved stories and I couldn't write. So I thought, well, I'll get into theatre. I will act stories. I will learn the words and I'll just speak them, and I won't ever have to write anything down. And it was whilst I was working at a theatre called Shakespeare's Globe that I learned that Shakespeare, who is supposedly one of the best playwrights in the world ever to ever have been born in the history of writers, he never spelt words the same, not even his own name. On his will, his name is spelt 3 different ways. And we've only got 1 page of writing that we can be absolutely certain he hand wrote. And on that page, it's a speech from a play. There are no commas. He doesn't use any capital letters. There's no punctuation whatsoever. And words are spelt differently. And that's when I realized, hang on a minute. Storytelling is not the same as writing clear, concise English. Storytelling is a different skill. You can be a brilliant storyteller and still struggle with the mechanics of writing things down. And Shakespeare, widely acknowledged as one of the best writers ever born, never spelt things the same and didn't use any grammar. Editors did all that later. So I thought, well, if Shakespeare can do it, maybe I could have a go at writing things down. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad if I had some spelling mistakes, because I was quite paranoid about it. But I was a grown-up by the time I had that thought. I started writing Beetle Boy when I was 30, and it is the first ever book that I tried to write. So I learned a lot about storytelling whilst working in theatre. But yes, that's how I ended up being a writer, by discovering that Shakespeare was rubbish at spelling too.
Amazing. Yeah, I should tell my daughter that. She actually is dyslexic, but her writing, when you read it, is wonderful. It's not grammatically perfect, but yeah. And what would you have been if you weren't an author? Oh, you said you were an actress.
I was, yeah, and I wanted to work in theatre. I probably would have stayed working in theatre all my life because of my love for stories and telling stories. And I still love theatre, and I will work in theatre again, but maybe I will write for the stage rather than being on the stage. So yeah, definitely, I would have stayed in theatre.
Fantastic. So there are two questions again that are quite similar. One is, do you have any tips for aspiring authors? And the other one is more about how you structure your writing process. So how does that
Right, yes. So I do have lots of good tips. First of all, don't worry about getting it right. Don't worry about it having the perfect beginning and everything spelt correctly or that kind of stuff. Stay there. I'm not going far. I'm just reaching over to get this. This is Twitch Notebook 2 that I filled whilst I was away on holiday. This is how books start for me. I'm going to just bring that in. I've got post-it notes, scribbles, got pictures, I've stuck things in, I've got loose bits of paper, I've got fold out things that I've Pritt sticked in with like image references. I've got like more post-it notes. I've got lots of pictures of characters that are in the story. I've got like diagrams. I've got lots of nonsense that won't make any sense to anyone else but me. Like I've got the crime timeline here. So I've got a timeline. I've got lots of things. And basically this notebook, which is all the inspiration for the story, it's got crazy things about relationship maps. It's just my brain. It's just thoughts. I fill 3 of these before I'm ready to even write a sentence. And once I've filled them all with messy nonsense, sometimes I'll write a few paragraphs, sometimes I'll draw pictures. I mean, as much messy nonsense as possible. Once I've got 3 of those, I've usually got enough ingredients for a story. But then I still don't start writing. What I do is I then divide the story into a structure. So like a beginning, a middle, and an end. Instead of having 3 acts, I actually use 5. So I have a beginning, everything's going well, everything starts to go wrong, everything goes really wrong, and then the end. So I've got like quite a big middle. And I get scenes that I put on post-it notes. I'll be like, oh, I want a scene where Twitch and the pigeons are out and he's releasing them to see if they go home. So I'll like Twitch pigeon scene, and I'll stick the post-it note on the wall, and I'll try and gather the post-it notes. It's what I call post-it note plotting. I try and gather them into the beginning, the middle, and the end. And then when I can see them all on the wall and I can see all the scenes that are going to happen, then I'll write my first draft. I'll write a version of the story that no one else will ever see, where all the spelling will be wrong. There will be no punctuation at all. I let myself go crazy with my imagination. I do not worry about writing. I just get it all out onto the page. Sometimes I don't even finish sentences because I get so excited. And then once I've got that first draft, I call it draft 0, then I've got a story. And then I can start editing and working on that story and making it good. So that's my process. And I really recommend everyone, even if you're really good at grammar and spelling, don't focus on that, because what you want at the beginning is ideas, imagination, like crazy stuff that will make your story exciting. That's what you need when you set out to create a story.
Fantastic. That's an amazing tip. Everybody needs to write that down, and don't forget we're recording this and we'll be sending it out to you later. But that's amazing. So someone's asked a question, and I think I know what your answer is going to be. Is this your favorite book that you've written?
So yes, it is. But that's because usually the most recent book that you've written, you're completely in love with, because it's all fresh in your head and you've worked so hard. And, you know, the books that I wrote 5 years ago, I still love them, but I don't think about them so much anymore. Right now, this is absolutely my favorite book. It's a very special book to me because I've fallen in love with birdwatching whilst writing it. But I also think that this cover by Paddy Donnelly is the most beautiful cover of any book ever, but definitely of all of mine. And I'm really, really pleased, when you read the book, you'll see why, with the ending to this book, because I think that it might be the best ending I've ever written. And that's saying something, because Beetle Boy ends with a spectacular beetle battle with poo and everything. But I think this ending is better. So
it's, I mean, my son and I have to agree, we were absolutely ripped right through to the end. And then I thought you were actually going to say it's like choosing your children. You can't pick, they're all my favourites.
This one's my favourite.
So you've worked with Sam Sedgman on Adventures in Trains, and you worked with Duncan Beattie and Daniel, is it Riley, for your picture? Yeah. Are there any authors or illustrators that you'd really love to work with?
There are two. So there is an illustrator called Jim Kay, who does the Harry Potter hardbacks. And I don't know if anyone's seen them, but you can get Harry Potter big, expensive, beautiful illustrated hardback books, and he does all of the pictures in them. And when Beetle Boy came out 5 years ago, I had two illustrators that I really wanted to do the cover. One was him, because his illustrations of insects are the best illustrations I've ever seen of insects, and I know that he could illustrate Beetle Boy so beautifully. He does really beautiful dark insect pictures, and I would love him to illustrate the Beetle Boy books. So he is definitely someone I hope I'll get to work with one day in the future when he's finished all the Harry Potter books. And the other illustrator, who has been my favorite illustrator for probably 30 years, is Chris Riddle, who was the previous Children's Laureate. I have loved his illustration since I was in my early 20s. And again, after Jim Kay was not able to illustrate Beetle Boy because he was doing Harry Potter, I asked Chris Riddell if he'd do the cover for Beetle Boy, and he had just been made the Children's Laureate, so he was too busy as well. So those two I would really love to work with one day.
And you know, you've picked two illustrators who have been to Bedford with BookTastic and with Rogan's Books, because we've had them both here and they're both wonderful. And Jim is amazing. I mean, you're absolutely right. He would do some incredible beetles and insects. Absolutely amazing. Okay, I think we've got time for one more. And a couple of people have asked this one, so I'm gonna blend their questions into this last question. Do you have a favourite bird? And or if you could be a bird, what bird would you be?
So, I think if I could be a bird, I would choose to be a pigeon. I genuinely would, because I think pigeons are very clever and very adaptable, and they're actually, they live a good long life as well. But they have a symbiotic relationship with humans. The reasons why you see pigeons everywhere is because they've learned how to live alongside humans. And quite a lot of birds that are becoming extinct can't survive around humans. So I would probably choose to be a pigeon. I'd like to be a beautiful pigeon like Maud. I would quite like to be a pretty pigeon, but I definitely think that would be a smart choice. But my favorite bird, I mean, it's always difficult to pick a favorite bird because I tend to change, like, you know, my opinion changes all the time. When I see a new bird, it becomes my favorite. But there is one bird that turned me into a bird watcher, because to begin with, it was kind of academic going and spotting birds. I didn't think of myself as a bird watcher. I was just going to see if I could write a book about birds. But whilst we were in Cromwell Bottom, Cromwell Bottom's actually famous for its kingfishers. It has amazing kingfishers there. And I'd been hoping that we'd see one. And we'd been there for 3 days, and I looked and I had no luck. I just didn't see the kingfishers. And so one morning I got up. I like to go for a run in the morning. I got up really early. It was about 5:30. And I was jogging along the canal side when I encountered a man who was walking his dog. And he was like, "How do you out to see the kingfishers?" And I was like, what, they're out? Where are they? How can I see them? And he was like, "Oh, just go and stand on the bridge across the river and just wait there. Don't move. Be patient. Stay there." So I did as I was told. I went to the bridge and I stood in the middle of the bridge and I looked down the river and I just waited. And then I saw what I can only describe as like a flash, like a blue flash. It was like someone had taken a wand and just cast a spell. It was like a blue streak. And I blinked because I thought, oh, my eyes are playing tricks on me. And then I saw another one and I was very confused because I was like, what was that? It was so fast. It was just, I couldn't, it was a blur. And then the blue flash stopped, paused, and landed on a branch. And I realized that what I was seeing was a kingfisher. And when they fish, they are so fast that your eye can't really see them. They just appear to be like a flash. And it was the most beautiful, beautiful bird. It was a magical morning. Like, I could hear the dawn chorus. I was on this bridge. There was not another human being in sight. And I watched the kingfishers swimming and fishing. And the whole world got a little bit bigger. And I felt like I was a muggle that had just seen the layer peel back and suddenly realized that there was magic in the world. It was the most incredible experience. And that was the moment where I suddenly became a bird watcher, because that's what you can feel when you see birds. And I was like, oh, I'm doing this again. This is amazing. So I would say that the kingfisher probably is my favorite bird. And they're a significant bird in this story because of that.
I mean, I don't know if it's anything to do with lockdown, but we recently in Bedford, there've been several sightings of kingfishers, and they're just magical. They are just a magical bird, aren't they? They're just incredible. Yeah. Oh, Maya, thank you so much for joining us today. That's been absolutely amazing. And I'm sure you all want to buy Twitch and read Twitch, and I don't blame you at all. If you do want to buy the book, and if you buy it from our online festival bookshop, you not only get a discount, but you're helping to support the festival as well and help us keep providing these events for you. The link has been sent to your teachers, and I'm sure they'll send it to your parents. If you're joining us for Katie and Kevin this afternoon, we'll see you then. Don't forget, the festival goes on all weekend, and you can find details of every author that we've got coming along on our website. But for now, Maya, that was incredible. Thank you so much. You all must go out and buy the book. We've read it countless times, and it's going to be a big hit. And there are going to be more, aren't there?
Oh, yes. I'm writing the second Twitch's book right now. It's very exciting, and that will come out this time next year.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I'm sure you all agree. This was amazing. Thank you so much, Maya, and good luck.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.